November 27, 1950. Chosin Reservoir, North Korea. Major General Oliver Smith received an order from MacArthur's headquarters. He read it once, then again. Then he looked at his staff officers. He wants us to attack? His intelligence officer nodded. Yes, sir. We're surrounded by Chinese forces. We're outnumbered 5-1. The temperature is 35 below zero. Half our equipment is frozen, and he wants us to attack. Yes, sir. Smith set down the message. Around him, thousands of Marines were trapped in a frozen valley. Chinese forces on every side. Escape routes cut off. Supply lines severed. Every military manual said the same thing. When surrounded, you retreat. You find a gap. You pull back. You save your men. But MacArthur's order didn't say retreat. It said attack. Not forward. Not backward. Sideways. Through the Chinese lines. In a direction they wouldn't expect. Smith looked at the map. The enemy positions. The frozen terrain. The impossible odds. Then he turned to his officers. Gentlemen, we're attacking through them. What happened next would become one of the greatest fighting withdrawals in military history. Marines surrounded by a Chinese army, attacking their way out through frozen hell.
This is the story of MacArthur's most impossible order and how his Marines turned a death trap into a legend.
Before we continue, make sure you subscribe. We tell the stories of World War II and Korea that show what happens when impossible orders meet unbreakable soldiers. To understand how the Marines ended up surrounded at Chosin, you need to understand what had been happening in Korea that fall. October 1950. The Korean War had turned. After the successful Incheon landing in September, MacArthur's forces pushed north. They liberated Seoul. They drove deep into North Korea. Victory seemed close. MacArthur was confident. He told President Truman the war would be over by Christmas. American forces reached the Yalu River, the border with China. North Korea was nearly defeated, but China was watching. Mao Zedong warned the United States, if American forces approached the Chinese border, China would intervene. MacArthur didn't believe it. He thought China was bluffing. He was wrong. November 1950, hundreds of thousands of Chinese troops crossed the border. They moved at night. They hid during the day. American reconnaissance missed them. The 1st Marine Division, under General Smith, was advancing toward the Chosin Reservoir, a frozen lake in the mountains of North Korea. The plan was to push north, link up with other UN forces, and finish the war. Then on November 27th, everything changed. Chinese forces attacked. Not in small numbers. Entire divisions. They surrounded the Marines at multiple positions around the reservoir. Udamni, Hagaruri, Kotori, small towns that would become famous. The Marines were cut off, isolated, surrounded, and the weather made everything worse. The temperature dropped to 35 below zero. Weapons froze. Vehicles wouldn't start. Medical supplies turned to ice. Morphine froze in syringes. Blood plasma froze solid. Men's hands froze to their rifles. Frostbite became as dangerous as enemy fire. General Smith assessed the situation. He had thousands of Marines scattered across the reservoir. Chinese forces, vastly outnumbering them, surrounded them completely. The nearest friendly forces were miles south through enemy territory. Smith sent a message to MacArthur's headquarters explaining the situation. Surrounded, outnumbered, requesting orders. MacArthur's response was simple. Break out. Attack south. Fight your way to the coast. But don't call it a retreat. Smith understood. The word retreat was poison. It destroyed morale. It suggested defeat. So he gave his famous order to his Marines. Retreat hell. We're not retreating. We're just advancing in a different direction. The breakout began on November 28th. The plan was brutal in its simplicity. Fight through Chinese positions. Take each town along the road. Bring the wounded. Bring the dead. Leave nothing behind. The Marines at Udamni, the most isolated position, had to fight their way south to Hagaruri, miles through Chinese-held territory. It took 3 days. They fought the entire way. Chinese forces attacked constantly. Day and night, the Marines moved in a column, fighting on all sides, carrying their wounded on stretchers, dragging equipment through snow. The cold was unrelenting. Men who stopped moving froze. Wounded men died from exposure before they bled out. Weapons had to be warmed by body heat to function, but they kept moving. One Marine, Private First Class William Baugh from Texas, later described it. "We'd take a hill at night. Chinese would counterattack. We'd fight them off, then march to the next hill and do it again. Over and over, for days. At Hagaruri, the Marines consolidated. General Smith established a defensive perimeter and built an airstrip. Engineers worked around the clock in sub-zero temperatures. They used explosives to break through the frozen ground. The airstrip allowed C-47 transport planes to evacuate the most seriously wounded and bring in supplies. But Smith refused to leave anyone behind. Dead Marines were loaded onto planes. Equipment that couldn't be carried was destroyed so the Chinese couldn't use it. Then came the hardest part. The breakout from Hagaruri to Kotori. Then from Kotori to the coast, miles of frozen mountain roads. Chinese forces controlled the high ground. They had artillery. They outnumbered the Marines significantly. MacArthur's headquarters monitored the situation from Tokyo. They sent air support when weather permitted. Corsair fighter planes strafed Chinese positions. C-19 cargo planes dropped supplies. But the Marines on the ground did the real fighting. They fought through ambushes. They cleared roadblocks. They captured hills, held them long enough for the column to pass, then abandoned them and moved on. The Chinese kept attacking. One night, Chinese forces overran a Marine position. Hand-to-hand fighting in the dark. Temperatures so cold that weapons jammed. Men fought with bayonets, knives, fists. The Marines retook the position at dawn. At one point, the road was cut. A bridge destroyed by Chinese forces. Engineers had to build a new bridge while under fire. They worked through the night. The bridge was completed in 48 hours. The column kept moving. By December 11th, the last Marines reached the coast at Hungnam. They'd fought their way out. Every man accounted for. Wounded evacuated. Dead brought home. The casualties were heavy on both sides. Thousands of Marines killed, wounded, or missing. The Chinese suffered far worse losses. But the Marines had done what MacArthur ordered. They'd broken out of encirclement. They'd fought their way through an entire Chinese army. And they didn't call it a retreat. When General Smith was asked about it later, he said, "Retreat suggests you're running away. We weren't running. We were fighting in every direction. That's not a retreat. That's an attack." MacArthur called it one of the greatest military achievements in history. The breakout from Chosin became legendary in the Marine Corps. Every Marine since then knows the story. It's taught at military academies. It's studied by strategists. The lesson isn't just about fighting. It's about leadership. It's about refusing to give up even when surrounded. It's about taking an impossible order and making it possible. MacArthur gave the order, but the Marines made it real. Years later, a historian asked a Chosin veteran why the Marines didn't just surrender. They were surrounded, outnumbered, freezing. Surrender would have saved lives. The veteran looked at him like he was crazy. "Surrender? We're Marines. We don't surrender. MacArthur told us to attack, so we attacked. Simple as that." That's the story of Chosin. An impossible order, a frozen hell, and Marines who refused to accept defeat. If you were General Smith, would you have followed MacArthur's order to attack, or would you have tried to negotiate a surrender to save lives? Let us know in the comments. And if you want more stories about Korea and World War II that show what impossible orders look like when they're carried out, make sure to subscribe.